All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. Today, we are diving into some pretty fascinating research. It's a study that was just published in Nature, and it's really making us rethink how we approach chemotherapy, especially for women with breast cancer.
Yeah, this one is really interesting. I was excited to see this come out.
So the big question here, and this is what we're going to deep dive into today, is could we actually make chemotherapy more effective by timing it with something as natural as a woman's menstrual cycle?
Yeah, it's a really intriguing idea. The concept is that by kind of syncing cancer therapy with the body's own natural hormonal ebbs and flows, we might be able to boost treatment efficacy.
Okay, so let's break this down a little bit. So we all know chemotherapy targets those rapidly dividing cells, right?
Okay.
That's the whole point of it. But I'm guessing that the speed at which cancer cells divide, it's probably not constant, right?
Exactly right. And that's exactly where the menstrual cycle comes in. So this study is suggesting that tumor cell growth actually fluctuates throughout the cycle.
Okay, I'm already intrigued. So how did they even go about testing this?
Well, they started with a mouse model. So a mouse model of breast cancer. And by tracking tumor cell growth during different phases of the mouse's estrus cycle, which is essentially their version of a menstrual cycle, they found something really quite remarkable. Tumor cells grew much faster during the estrus phase,
Okay, so estrus being...
the phase where progesterone levels are low. And here's where it gets really interesting. So the mice that receive chemotherapy during this estrus phase, when those tumor cells are dividing like crazy, they had significantly better outcomes.
Hold on. Better outcomes in what sense?
In pretty much every sense. Smaller tumors, fewer metastases, and yes, even higher survival rates, all compared to the mice who received chemo at other points in their cycle.
Wow, okay, that's a pretty striking difference. But of course, mice aren't humans. So
Yeah.
did the researchers actually take this a step further and look at human data?
They did. And what they found, it really makes you wonder if we've been overlooking like a critical piece of the puzzle this whole time. They analyzed data from women with breast cancer, and they specifically focused on the progesterone levels at the time that they started chemo.
So they were looking for that same link between progesterone levels and treatment response that they saw in the mice.
Exactly. And the parallels are pretty remarkable. The data showed that women who had lower progesterone levels when they initiated chemo, similar to that estrus phase in the mice, they tended to respond better to treatment.
That's huge. So are we talking about all types of breast cancer here, or is this specific to certain types?
That's a great question, and it is something that future research will need to explore further. So this initial study focused on a specific subset of breast cancers, those that are hormone receptor positive.
Okay, so for those specific types of breast cancer, this could be a game changer. But you said initial study, so how big was this data set?
Right, so we do need to be cautious about drawing sweeping conclusions just yet. The human data set was relatively small in this study, which the researchers themselves acknowledge as a limitation. But the signal is certainly strong enough to warrant further investigation.
Okay, so this isn't ready for prime time just yet. But what are the implications here if these findings are confirmed in larger studies?
Well, it could potentially revolutionize the way we approach chemotherapy scheduling. Imagine being able to personalize treatment plans based on a woman's menstrual cycle, maximizing efficacy while potentially minimizing side effects.
It all comes back to personalized medicine, doesn't it? Really understanding the individual patient's biology to tailor treatment.
Absolutely. This study is a perfect example of why that approach is so crucial. We're not just talking about tweaking a treatment schedule here. We're talking about potentially unlocking a whole new level of precision in cancer care.
This is where I get a little skeptical, though. Isn't there a risk of kind of overcomplicating things? I mean, chemo is already a complex process. Adding another layer of timing considerations could be tricky, right?
You raise a very valid point. It wouldn't be a simple plug-and-play solution. It would require careful study, standardized protocols, probably new tools to help oncologists make these individualized timing decisions. But the potential payoff could be enormous.
And it's not just about improving existing treatments either. It's like this opens up a whole new avenue of research, right? If the menstrual cycle can influence chemo response, what other biological rhythms might be at play?
That's what I find so exciting about this. It's like we're peeking behind the curtain and seeing this whole new layer of complexity in how our bodies interact with treatment. And it really begs the question, what other hidden factors are we overlooking? What other rhythms might we be able to harness for better health outcomes? What other hidden factors are we overlooking? What other rhythms might we be able to harness for better health outcomes?
It really makes you think, doesn't it? What if we've been approaching treatment with like a one-size-fits-all mentality, when there's actually all this nuance to consider.
That's exactly what this study highlights. And it really underscores the need for more research in this area. We need to delve deeper into the mechanisms at play, understand why lower progesterone seems to correlate with better response, and figure out how to translate these findings into practical treatment strategies.
So for our listener who might be hearing all this and thinking, okay, this is fascinating, but what does it actually mean for me? What's the key takeaway here?
I think the most important message is that there's potentially a way to personalize chemotherapy, especially for hormone receptor positive breast cancers, to make it even more effective. And it could be as simple as timing treatment with a woman's natural cycle. It's definitely something to discuss with your oncologist, especially if you're about to start chemotherapy.
And it's a good reminder that, our bodies aren't static. They're constantly in flux. And understanding those rhythms and fluctuations could be the key to unlocking better health outcomes. Speaking of rhythms, you mentioned other potential factors that might be at play. What kind of things are researchers looking into?
Well, the circadian rhythm is a big one. There's growing evidence that the time of day when you receive treatment could influence its effectiveness. And then there's the whole world of the microbiome and how those trillions of bacteria in our gut could play a role in treatment response.
It's amazing to think about how much we're still learning about the human body and how it interacts with medicine. It's like we're just scratching the surface.
Exactly. And that's why research like this is so important. It challenges our assumptions, opens up new avenues of exploration, and ultimately leads to better care for patients. It really is fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, it makes you wonder how much we've been leaving on the table, in terms of treatment outcomes, because we haven't fully appreciated this kind of complexity.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it also highlights, the importance of not just focusing on like the drug itself or the therapy itself, but also how it's delivered.
Yeah.
The timing, the context.
Right, the whole picture.
Exactly.
So I guess for our listeners, who are hearing all this, and maybe they're thinking, okay, this is all very interesting, but what does this mean for me? What's the key takeaway here?
I think the biggest takeaway is that there's a real potential here to personalize chemotherapy and make it even more effective. And it could be as simple as, timing treatment with a woman's natural cycle.
And that's something you can actually talk to your doctor about, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. If you're facing chemotherapy or someone who is, it's definitely a conversation to have with your oncologist.
It's so interesting how much, we're learning about these connections between our biology and how we respond to treatment. And this idea of, there's no such thing as like a one-size-fits-all approach anymore.
Exactly. And that's what makes research like this so exciting, because it really opens up new possibilities for how we approach healthcare.
Well, on that note, I think we'll wrap up our deep dive for today. Thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully this has given you some food for thought about the incredible complexity of the human body and the amazing potential we have to harness that knowledge for better health outcomes.